In the middle of an old, dusty forest, where even the trees looked like they had seen too many seasons to care anymore, there lived an owl named Professor Weasel. His eyes were sharp, his feathers were neat, and his memory was so strong that he could recite the wisdom of 20 generations without blinking once. If you asked him about the wind, he would tell you, "The wind changes direction, but the wise change with it." If you asked him about hard times, he would close one eye and say, "The strongest roots grow in the roughest soil." The animals loved him. Well, loved him from a respectful distance, because Professor Weasel had a habit, a strange one. He knew everything, but he did almost nothing. When the squirrels were tired of gathering nuts, he would give them a speech about planning ahead. When the deer argued over which path was safer, he would explain the importance of patience. When the rabbits panicked at the sound of thunder, he would calmly say, "Fear is a storm inside the mind." Beautiful words, wise words, heavy words. But if a branch needed moving, Weasel sat. If a nest needed repairing, Weasel advised. If food needed carrying, Weasel nodded wisely and said, "A journey begins with intention." The forest had begun to whisper about him. "Professor Weasel is very intelligent," said the beaver. "Yes," said the hedgehog, "and very comfortable." The rabbit, named Chicky, was younger than most and had the kind of energy that made older animals sigh just by looking at him. Chicky was the opposite of Weasel. He did not know many big words, and when he tried to sound clever, he usually mixed two proverbs together and made nonsense. One day he proudly announced, "Slow and steady wins the moon?" The raccoons laughed so hard one of them fell into a puddle. Chicky was embarrassed, but he kept trying. He asked Weasel for advice every day. "How do I become wise?" Weasel would answer, "Read, listen, observe." "How do I become respected?" "Speak less, think more." "How do I become useful?" "Understand the world deeply." Chicky nodded so hard his ears bounced. Then he would run off and do absolutely nothing useful with that understanding. The forest animals thought this was a perfect pair. One animal with all the knowledge and no action, and another with all the enthusiasm and no direction. Then came the dry season. At first it was not scary. The river became thinner, the grass became sleepy, the birds complained dramatically, as birds always do when even one leaf looks tired. But then the water hole near the fig trees dried up completely. That was a serious matter. Animals began to line up at the last remaining muddy pond, which looked less like a pond and more like soup that had given up on life. The elephants drank first, the antelope waited, the monkeys argued about fairness, which meant they were very much not helping. Soon even that pond was shrinking. Panic moved through the forest like a rumor with good shoes. The beaver said, "We need a new water source." The deer said, "Perhaps there is a hidden stream." The owl, as expected, said, "In times of shortage, wisdom is not in finding water, it is in understanding patience." Nobody knew what that meant, but it sounded important, so they nodded. Chicky, however, did not nod. He looked at the cracked ground. He looked at the tired animals. He looked at Professor Weasel sitting on his branch, giving a lecture about resilience. Then Chicky asked, "Professor, do you know where water is?" Weasel puffed up proudly. "I know many things, little rabbit. I know the underground roots of the valley. I know the path of rain. I know the old stories of springs hidden beneath stone. I know the signs that water leaves behind." Chicky's ears lifted. "So, can we find it?" Weasel opened his beak, paused, and said, "Knowledge is the first treasure." Chicky waited. Weasel blinked. The animals waited too. At last, Chicky said, "That didn't answer my question." A few animals gasped. One monkey dropped a fig. Weasel cleared his throat. Searching the earth requires planning. We must first consider the angle of the sun, the softness of the soil, the migration patterns of beetles, the memory of moss, the behavior of— Professor, Chicky interrupted gently, the forest is drying while you are teaching beetles a philosophy class. That was rude, but also true. For the first time in his life, Professor Weasel had no elegant answer. Chicky looked around. He was not the wisest animal in the forest, not by a long shot, but he had something that wisdom often refuses to wear: urgency. He ran to the beaver. Can you cut branches for a guide path? He ran to the moles. Can you dig where the ground is damp? He ran to the birds. Can you fly over the hills and look for streams? He ran to the deer. Can you carry the smaller animals to shade? And then, because he had no choice, he went to work himself. He dug, he dragged, he sweated through his fur in a way that rabbits are not emotionally designed to enjoy. He slipped into mud, he dragged logs, he barked directions at animals 3 times his size. One squirrel laughed and said, "Look at Chicky, he's acting like a rabbit with a bossy mustache." Even Weasel, high above, could not hide a tiny smile. But the owl still did not move. Until evening. By then the birds had found nothing. The moles had found only damp stones. The beavers were tired. The deer were thirsty. The forest was losing hope by the leaf. Then Chicky noticed something. A line of ants carrying tiny wet grains of sand was moving into the ground near a crooked hill. Chicky crouched, watched, and remembered something Weasel had once said months ago during one of his endless speeches. When the ants move in a line toward the hill after a dry wind, there is often water below. Chicky's eyes widened. He shouted, "Dig here!" The animals stared. "That hill?" asked the beaver. "That hill," said Chicky. The moles dug first. The beaver helped. The deer pushed fallen stones aside. Chicky scratched till his paws hurt. The earth gave resistance, then sighed, and then a cool, thin trickle of water emerged. Not much at first, just a silver thread. Then more, then a small stream, and then the whole forest erupted in joy. The elephants trumpeted, the birds sang, the monkeys shouted so loudly even the clouds looked offended. The animals drank carefully, gratefully, like they had just been handed back their future. Professor Weasel finally descended from his branch. He stood at the edge of the stream, staring at the water as if it had personally betrayed him. Chicky looked up at him, mud on his nose and pride in his tired eyes. "You knew about the ants," Chicky said. "You knew about the hill." Weasel lowered his head. "Yes," he said. "Then why didn't you lead us here?" Weasel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, in a voice softer than owl feathers in rain, "Because knowing felt enough. I mistook information for usefulness. I was so busy collecting wisdom that I forgot wisdom must walk on its own feet." No animal laughed. Even the monkeys stayed still, which was probably the most dramatic sign of seriousness in the forest. Weasel looked at Chicky. "You were never the cleverest in the forest." Chicky smiled awkwardly. "Frink you, I think. But today," said the owl, "you were the wisest, because you acted." And that was the lesson the forest never forgot. Knowledge is a lantern, but it is not the road. It can show the way, but only if somebody is willing to take the first step. Words can map the mountain, but feet must climb it. Ideas can fill a mind, but action fills a life. That night, under a sky full of tired stars, Professor Weasel did something shocking. He did not give a lecture. He lifted a bucket, carried it to the smallest nest, and helped Chicky bring water to the injured animals. And as the moon watched quietly from above, the old forest learned a truth deeper than any proverb. Knowledge without action is just a sleeping seed. It may look beautiful in your hand, but until you plant it, water it, and let it break the soil, it will never become a tree.